Hello everybody, it's Saturday. I'm not even sure what the date is. This week's been a crazy week. I've just got back from Scotland and I want to make an announcement, and I would have made the announcement a couple of days ago, but there were much greater priorities in my life. Many of you over the last few weeks have probably watched a GOG as a band sampler known as MH1656 has been bandied around Facebook. It is so very, very sad. This beautiful museum quality band sampler was a gift to me from my husband, and it deserved much better than this. Rarely do such samplers in private ownership become available as reproductions. Now Stitchers have two different versions. One is now being offered as a free download by people who have no permission whatsoever to reproduce or publish this chart for themselves. They did not reproduce this sampler from a photograph. There has never been a photograph in the public domain that shows this sampler in the detail required to reproduce it. Instead, they gained access to the original sampler under the guise of preparing a graph for Hands Across the Sea samplers. I have here a PDF of that graph where they have clearly recorded that the copyright lies with Hands Across the Sea samplers. To now publicly claim that I altered the copyright from their name to mine is ludicrous. This PDF was sent to me from their private email address, and that was an attachment to the email. An incoming email is indisputable digital record. Now you have two choices of graphs for MH1656. Now we've got the very sad part of this video out of the way, let's forget about it and let's look at the official version that has been reproduced by me from the very first to the last stitch. I'm very proud, and Sandra is, and all the team at Hands Across the Sea Samplers to release and show to you MH1656, my beloved's gift. This is a beautiful, stunning, reversible band sampler. This sampler is nearly 400 years old and her condition is absolutely gorgeous. I was so pleased when my husband agreed to buy this at auction for me, and I was so happy because I could share that with my stitching sisters. I could make this sampler available for you to stitch so that copies could hang in your home. But I've still done it. I've sat down, I've reproduced it. I've had loads and loads of encouragement from Miss Jean Lee, Kimberly Young and Sandra Moffat, and this booklet is dedicated to those three very special ladies for their encouragement and support in what has been a very dark and upsetting time for me. Let's show you the original sampler. One moment. This is the front of the original sampler. I'm sorry about the lighting, but it's dark here, and well, not dark, it's very grey and overcast, and it's evening time. Now that is the front, which is beautiful in its own right. let me just put this down, turn it around and show you the back. Right, so here is the back of the sampler, and it's the back of the sampler that I chose to reproduce, because although these colours would have faded slightly as well, these are the colours that MH actually chose. You can see just how beautiful it is, and what a wonderful example of reverse stitching. If it wasn't for the alphabets being reversed, you really wouldn't know that that was the back. Now this sampler has to go off to be conserved because, as you can probably see, there's a little bit of board stuck to the sides. But this is going off to the best conservator in the UK now, who will do a wonderful job conserving it and preserving it for future generations. This original sampler is going to hang in my home, and at the end of my days that sampler will be gifted to a museum, because it's a museum where that sampler belongs. Samplers create a lot of emotion in my heart, and I can't always express what I want to say about a sampler. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to read to you how I described the joy of this sampler in the booklet. Better put my glasses on because I'm not going to see a dicky bird without my glasses. This sampler takes the needleworker on a journey, almost a musical journey, with each of the bands having its own characteristics, yet contributing to the piece as a whole. It almost seems as if MH was the conductor of an orchestra, bringing in her threads and colours at precisely the right time. She has demonstrated a mastery of melody, structure and orchestration, a command of tone, colour and harmony. The first few bands start off with simple stitches, a gentle meandering theme in a slow tempo, played quite softly with an occasional louder part to keep our interest. As in music, she takes a theme, repeats it, and then starts to develop it in different ways. She ingeniously uses different colours, some lighter, some brighter. She changes directions of the threads, and she uses different stitches. She varies the textures in some areas. Towards the middle of the sampler, it is almost as if there is a change of theme, with the colours becoming bolder. The musical journey is developing and gathering pace. You feel as if you are being led somewhere with the introduction of a beautiful blue downward path in the middle of the sampler. You can feel the intensity rising, almost as if you are reaching a crescendo. The path leads to a much louder part, almost the centrepiece of the sampler, where it seems as if all the orchestra is playing and taking you to new heights. MH finally leaves us with a return to more muted area, and to conclude her sampler, her skill with a needle is to be much admired. When I sit in my study for hours on end, it's normally at the end of the day going through to the early hours of the morning, and I often have an audiobook or I have music playing. I didn't need that with MH. Her sampler was so melodious that it filled me with the same feeling that I get when I go to a concert and I listen to a beautiful piece of music being played. I hope that when you stitch MH that you will feel that in your heart as well. Now, let's just have a little run through about the sampler. She's stitched entirely over 3 threads. But when you come to the thread legend, you need to remember that a graph on a computer program, the square represents 2 threads. So when I say that this sampler has a design area of 130 stitches by 929 stitches, that isn't squares representing 3 threads. That are squares representing 2 threads. So the size of this design area, say on 46 count, would be 5.65 inches by 40.39 inches. She is a big girl. The original sampler is 5.25 inches by 36 inches, and it's on uneven weave. That's why there's a slightly different proportion to the original sampler. The stitches. This is the lovely part. When you sit down with a sampler and you're looking at it under high magnification, this is where you discover all the little secrets. And with a band sampler, you really have to turn her over. It's the back that shows you the stitch path and enables you to work out the stitches. Now, she used double running stitch, back stitch, satin stitch, Montenegrin stitch, diamond upright stitch, diagonal cross stitch, and 2 variations of reversible cross stitch. Really, she's suitable for very confident intermediate stitchers to advanced stitchers. It's a beautiful sampler if you want to dip your feet into reversible stitching. The sampler just flows, and with good instructions you will be able to follow this. And of course, you don't have to stitch her reversibly at all, and you don't even have to stitch her with Montenegrin stitch. But have a go. When you have a go, you can really, really surprise yourself. What I've said in the booklet is that we highly recommend you referring to Darlene Osteen's The Proper Stitch and Amy Mitten's Autopsy of the Montenegrin Stitch. Both of these books you will find very useful for this sampler, and to be honest, if you're a needleworker, these books are wonderful additions to your bookshelf, so try and get them. But what I've done, and I don't think I could ever do as well as Darlene Osteen or Amy Mitten, I have provided what I hope are stitch instructions that will help you stitch this reversibly. Now, I know with Montenegrin stitch that sometimes it's really hard for you to work out your stitch path. So what I did in this booklet, I've shown the Montenegrin stitch, how I how I put them in compartments in my mind, and I use little segments like this, and then when I in my mind lay out a design in these little boxes, I can then see where my stitch path is going to go. Now, this is the outline of a leaf taken from the graph, and I've shown here my stitch path. Now, my stitch path is a little different from the stitch paths you will find in the reference books I've mentioned, but it's how I do it. You don't have to copy me, you don't have to copy Amy or Darlene. You practice this stitch, you find your way of doing it, and you stitch this sampler your way. Now, let's go to the area where we have a lot of Montenegrin stitch. Here we go. So I've shown all the way around how you work it, and when you get to these little points where it merges, you need to know to refer to the stitch guide for the instructions on merging your Montenegrin stitch, which I've shown you how to turn corners, how to merge on the diagonal, and how to go from the horizontal to the diagonal. And on this one, I've shown you a complete combination, so you should be able to follow. With the booklet, we have, as always, 4 pages of history about the 1600s, which Sandra and I had great fun working on and researching. We've been planning this booklet since my darling husband bought me this sampler maybe about the middle or the early autumn of last year. You then have the stitch directions, and then we start with the graph pages. Everything on the graph page is clearly annotated, so there's no guessing what the colours are. Every colour that you need and the stitch that you need to create this beautiful sampler is very clearly recorded on the graph pages. Now, MH was very good to keeping to her 3 stitches, but what she did occasionally was she started her bands a stitch off, and that could have been a stitch off on the vertical or a stitch off on the horizontal. Now, you could line it up and stitch everything that it starts in the same point, and definitely in groups of 3, but I think that it's very good for us to chart this exactly how she stitched it. So what I've done to make this a little bit easier for you, on the graph, when she started a thread off, I've put a little pointy finger, so that you know that you have to watch whether she's gone off on the difference between the bands, or she's started in or out by a stitch. And she's done this quite a few times. So when you start a band, look out for that. The other lovely thing about this graph is that the band fitted across 2 pages. So when you open your graph, this is the entire width of the sampler. You don't have to flick over pages to stitch the whole band. I hope you find that useful. Oh, before I move off from this page, this band here, which is repeated at the top of this section and again below, be careful. She starts this 3 stitches gap, but the next one, sorry, not 3 stitches, 3 threads. She starts the next one 6 threads, and then she alternates between 3 threads and 6 threads all the way across. There are quite a few little anomalies like that through the chart, so always look before you stitch. You couldn't reproduce this sampler by charting out one motif and then copying and pasting it across the band. Every single stitch on this graph had to be hand drawn out using your mouse. I've just seen a question asked by somebody who's watching: can you stitch this sampler over 2 threads rather than 3? Yes, you can. The whole sampler is stitched over 3 threads, so there is no reason why you just can't alter that to over 2 threads. She will just reduce in size in proportion to the original sampler. What else can I think of? When I've started releasing samplers via video, I used to do a pre-recorded video where I would film a section, edit it, film the next section. But I've been told that you really like my live videos, so really I ought to have a script written out, but If it's live, it's off the cuff. Oh, colours. She uses a palette of 22 colours, and what you'll notice about the thread legend, there are no symbols, and that's because there are no symbols in the graph, because there's no traditional cross stitch. Let me think. Oh, the other thing that we haven't done is I've not specified a brand or colour of linen, because every time I say what colour I think this should be stitched on, or what brands of linen it should be stitched on, it always seems to be a problem. So what I've done with this one is I have given you the DMC shade numbers that are as close to the original sampler as possible. And this linen, which you just see in the original sampler, is somewhere between DMC 167 and DMC 304. Now, I know that Kimberly Young at the Attic and Kimberly Young at Sassy Jacks and Jean Lee at the Attic have both of them have approached different companies to dye linen, especially for this sampler. It's not a standard cut because it's very, very narrow and very, very long. So if you speak to Kimberly and to Jean, they can give you details of what they've chosen. My one word of advice is that if you go for a over-dyed linen, please be careful to avoid an over-dye that has pinkish or reddish tones in, because it will kill the colour palette. You'll lose all those beautiful coppers, apricots and peaches. So try and avoid that. The other thing about MH, the original just shines. The sheen on the silks are so beautiful. And what we've done, we've worked with Access Commodities, who have put together a special thread pack of the 103 silks. And what I've done, if you go to the Hands Across the Sea website, not Facebook page, but website, you will see in the Thread Legends section a photograph of all those spools of silk laid out against the skeins of the D'Alga, and Namora at Access has done a beautiful conversion for us. And on the Thread Legend on the website, we list the 103 colours as well as the normal AVAS and DMC. Now, the other thing with this sampler, that some colours you use very little of. So what I've done, by popular request from some of our loyal customers, when you look at the Thread Legend, you will see that we've given not only the skeins, but we've given the thread usage in inches. Now there's one colour that you only use 6 inches of thread. So really, if you didn't want to go to the expense of buying a whole skein, you might have a tad left in your stash that's enough, or you might just decide to substitute that with a slightly similar colour. I hope that it's an added benefit that works for you. What else can I tell you? I know. We have, oh look, I've spoilt this, I've sat on it. We've done the bookmarks, so you have your Thread Legend there. Now, I couldn't fit all those stitch instructions on the back of the bookmark, so I've just put a couple of them. I'm really thrilled with this, and I hope that stitchers will recognise that this is the only authorised reproduction of this sampler. and I hope that Stitchers will recognise the amount of work that has gone into reproducing this band sampler authentically, putting together a booklet that has very good, clear instructions, the history and research that's gone into this booklet, and of course the huge investment that has gone into buying the original sampler. Hands Across the Sea Samplers only reproduces samplers from my collection. We do not reproduce samplers that belong to other people. We do not reproduce samplers that we do not have permission to reproduce. Instead, we use our money, our savings, to buy these samplers, and we are so happy to share those samplers with you. Enjoy her. She's live on our website, so you can go ahead and purchase her. I will be shipping this weekend supplies to our regular stockists. I'm a bit behind because those of you who know me know that I've had an unexpected event this week where I had to travel to Scotland, but that was my main priority. Charts will be out in shops very, very quickly. So enjoy, and thank you for listening to me. Bye bye.